can't not look at this any other way than from the bottom up. I mean, I hear your comments about businesses, but I got to say, absent from that is how the hell do people make a living and put a roof over their head and feed their families on the wages that some people are paying? And to suggest that it's the people at the bottom who have to make this adjustment, and the adjustment means spending 50% or more of your income trying to put a roof over your head, going without food, going without vacations, not being able to take your kids to a movie, a million things that most of us take for granted because we are all blessed not to live on that side of the coin. We live in a different world. I shudder to think where we would all fit in the national scale of incomes, but it's certainly not anywhere close to the bottom. So I look at this as a fundamental social justice issue. And when I hear people say, and nobody here has said it today, but these are beginning jobs and beginning wages, well, that would be fine if somebody getting a beginning job could go to an apartment owner and say, I want a beginning rent. And when you walk to Giant, you say, and I need beginning food prices. And I'd like to buy my clothes at beginning prices too, because I'm just beginning. But society is not set up that way. There is no beginning. You go to the starting line, you leave your parents' house, and you're out there in the real world, and you've got to put food on the table. Nobody's cutting you a beginning slack. Everybody expects you to pay the same as everybody else. And you may not have the resources to pay the same as everyone else. I get concerned when people want to do well-meaning programs. I mean, we want to make sure that everybody has food in some date certain. The easiest way to make sure everybody has food is give them enough money to go to the grocery store and buy food. You really don't need a government program to put food on people's tables unless you've got government policies that prevent people from getting wages that are adequate to put food on the table. People do not choose welfare as a lifestyle. They do not look for handouts. People feel better when they earn a living. And as a teacher, I got to say that there is a great value in coming from a household where people go to work and bring home a paycheck and kids see work, paycheck, and the things you need in life. Not, I'm waiting for my government check, for my rent, I'm waiting for medical assistance, I'm waiting for this, and I'm waiting for that. It is a whole different psychological world. And I'll say, if conservatives got anything right over the past years, is this notion that dependency is not a healthy situation for people to be in. People need to feel they can stand on their own 2 feet. The problem is that we've created situations that create dependency. Dependency isn't something people chose. Dependency is a circumstance that comes out of the current economic system. I would point out that the Democratic Party actually finally wrapped its head around this. And in the last campaign said, this is where we have to go. So I don't get why in a place that's not only one of the wealthiest places in the country, frankly, we're one of the wealthiest places in the world. Very few people have the things we have. We're also one of the most expensive places in the country to live. And to not acknowledge that and not try to raise people up at least to a minimum, and we're not even talking about a living wage. I mean, God forbid any of us suggest going to $17.38 an hour. We're not doing that. We're just trying to get to the point that people have to pay less extreme portions of their income to put a roof over their head. Most people aren't going to be able to get away with paying 30% of their income. They're going to wind up having to pay more than 30%, but more than 30 and less than 50 is a good thing. And so I'm looking, as one of my colleagues referred to, I'm looking forward to raising wages so that money goes back into the economy. So that all the stores that are worried about, am I going to lose business, is this going to be harder, actually have more customers buying more things. We know that if this money goes into the hands of working people, it gets spent in the neighborhood store. It does not get spent on fine pieces of art. It does not get spent on elaborate vacations. It goes to meeting the basic needs. And who better to meet the basic needs than the local shopkeepers? They're the ones that, dry clean your clothes and, sell you your medicine and your food and everything else. That's where folks are going to go with their money. And, we're really good at doing multiplier effect if some big corporation comes in here and we're measuring what's the impact of my giving them an $11 million, tax break. Well, then I'll get this paper that says, well, you got to talk about the multiplier effect and all this money that's going to be spent in the economy. But all of a sudden, when we talk about what happens with raising the wages of working people, apparently there is no multiplier effect. Well, there is a multiplier effect. And we need to take that into account. I think this is the right thing to do. I agree with my colleagues' comments about studies. And I actually think Tom is right. Most studies indicate the effect is minimal. There are economists who differ. I think we were told we were going to destroy the universe by one economist last time, and he was a respected moderate economist and a so-called minimum wage expert, and we were going to destroy the universe because we were going outside what he deemed to be the proper parameters, and we didn't destroy the universe. So I feel that we're not going to destroy the universe this time, and the hardest study to do is the study going forward. You have no idea what decisions business people will make. You don't know whether a landlord faced with businesses that because their labor costs have risen might have to temper their rent increases. It may be that to keep tenants in buildings and keep businesses viable, they have to give a little bit. I don't understand why the only people who have to give to make a business work are working people, who are actually the people working in the businesses that make it possible for an owner to make money. So it seems to me that if there's going to be shared pain, everybody takes a little nibble on this. I mean, we're going to have to pay more for people in social services. I get that. But, I mean, you do realize that people making $12 an hour to change diapers on an adult is obscene anyway. Whether or not I can get away with it and whether or not it's legal doesn't change the fact that that's a terrible thing to ask somebody to do. And those people do it with great devotion and dedication. And I know some of these workers because I've got a foster son who gets this kind of help. Is an incredibly difficult job to do. And I appreciate the work these people do. But they are paid pretty much minimal wages. And I just think, you know, if a person goes to work, they ought to earn enough money to put a roof over their head. They ought to be able to look at themselves and say, this is dignified. All work should be dignified. We shouldn't disdain some jobs as well. Those are crappy jobs because they're starter jobs. That's crappy pay because it's starter pay. We just shouldn't do that. We should come to some basic, decent floor. And I think all this bill does is provide a basic, decent floor in 2020. And as far as compromises go, I mean, I've worked hard to try to get to some point where more than the majority of the council, because there are people, 5 of us, who support this bill. But it would be better to get a broader consensus on the council. And I thought there were some, useful ideas that were put out there. And we've worked the last week to try to close some of these differences. And so it's disappointing now that the reversion strategy is to go to a study which will tell you pretty much what you know now. And I will say, if you insist on a study, then I want a study on poverty. I want a calculation of every dollar in lost future wages by a kid who grows up in poverty. I want a study on divorce rates and family instability that are caused by poverty. If you want to study, then study what happens to the majority of people affected by the minimum wage, which are the people who work, rather than just a study on what might the business impacts be. But the truth is, we know the answers to both of those. We really do. We know what happens to human beings who earn too little, and we know that it's going to be a little bit harder for businesses, and they're going to have to make adjustments as well. But I think it's better for everybody to make adjustments and continue what we're doing right now. I take a view of the nonprofits as basically, they do work that the county might have otherwise done. And we do it because, frankly, there's no secret, what we pay a nonprofit is less than we pay county employees. I feel an enormous moral obligation that if we do the minimum wage, then we do the right thing by the nonprofits. I don't like the bifurcation of the nonprofits from the county government because they are essential to what we do. We fund them deliberately to carry out our mission. And I would not carry out my mission with underpaid employees if I could avoid it any more than I'd ask the private sector to do this. I mean, some costs are necessary. And I don't think, it may be, and this is not a discussion for here, but we've got to take a deeper look at what it costs to run and operate county government. I mean, we do need to think, can we do a better and more efficient job with the resources we have? Because there are a lot of demands. I mean, we could go, if you want to talk priorities, all of us probably have a long list of priorities and some shared priorities that are really expensive. And we can't continue to have a list of priorities we never get to because we're in our own way. So I don't want to be in my own way over raising the wage for nonprofits. I accept that as something we're going to do, and I do think we really have to look hard at what we're doing in general to make sure we're getting the best effectiveness for our dollars that we spend. But I don't think it's a reason not to move forward on this. And if wages go up, people pay higher taxes. Some programs, people now are able to pay for them rather than relying on subsidies. And I'll be blunt about this. The good thing about raising wages is to reduce the number of things that you subsidize. We don't need to do both. And we ought to get to the point where we're not running welfare programs for people who are working every day. People who work every day shouldn't need welfare.
People want to keep talking.
I think it's pretty direct. So I'd at least like to know what kind of tax impact this has. Because you're talking about like raising wages by a third. I would think that the county is going to realize more tax revenue out of something like that. The state's going to realize more sales tax because the extra income is going to go into producing, to buying things in stores where people pay taxes. I mean, it's not like the money evaporates into the air, it gets spent. The more money you make, the more taxes you pay. I don't need the hard number, but when somebody gives me an economic analysis that doesn't include the benefits, like the multiplier effect and all this other stuff, then it's like telling me what it costs without telling me what the benefits are to government from doing this is, I think, half the loaf. $13.50 is not a living wage. The fact that it's 50% of some number doesn't change the fundamental problem. He's not addressing what it takes to put food on the table or live in Montgomery County. He's got some abstract concept of what's the average wage, and he believes that that minimum wage ought to be 50% of that. Well, maybe he can talk to everybody else in the business community about people being able to live on 50% of that, and then we can have a conversation. But this is just an opinion. I think he's also the same guy who thinks we ought to increase welfare payments, which means basically taxing Montgomery County residents to fund welfare programs in order to supplement people's wages for the wages they don't get from employers. I'm not interested in more taxes on the middle class to pay for wages that ought to be paid for by employers. They cite the study by Allegretto, Dube, and Reich in 2011, and then a separate study in 2012, and they found no statistically significant effect of minimum wage on teens as a whole or on white, black, or Latino teens. And there's no evidence that employers changed the age or gender composition of the workforce in the restaurant sector in response to changes in the minimum wage. So both these things are sitting out there, which is, to your point, I just want to be sure everybody knows both these things are actually on the same report. Just a quick point on non-county beneficiaries. The district just passed a law, and Montgomery County residents are going to benefit who work in the district, and some district residents will benefit from working in Montgomery County. And while I wish Prince George's was involved in this, they're not. But our major, neighbor employing similar kinds of jobs is the district, and I feel pretty strongly that Montgomery County is not competing to see who I can lure to Montgomery County to pay workers $11.50 an hour. I mean, that is totally out of sync with whatever vision we have for economic development. So I don't think we're really harming ourselves in terms of attracting the lowest paid employers in the region. That's not our economic goal. And the other issue about sharing is, and I was interested when I was at the dedication of the senior housing on Bonifant Street next to the library, a whole bunch of residents of that were not Montgomery County residents. And it seemed like collecting the wage data, including the hourly number of hours that the employee worked, then it's simply a division problem. And we should just automatically cite any employer who doesn't pay up to $15. And I believe that the anecdotal stories are true. How prevalent it is, I don't know. But the issue of taking the employee out of the position of having to complain against their employer and take a labor action is I think to some people a big deal. We've talked about people not wanting to jeopardize their work, and so to the extent that we can automate this, and my understanding from Mr. Thompson was that the industry had no problem with automating it because they've committed to paying this difference, that we ought to look at simplifying this and making it automatic, and then I don't have to worry about some people not getting 15.